Hello, welcome to my channel and to my craft room. This is my first video, so please bear with me as I figure out this whole YouTube thing. In this video, I'm making corsets, but maybe not for the reason that you would think. I have a chronic illness that causes injuries and chronic pain, and one of my most common problems is back pain. So over the years I have tried many different back braces, and they're just really not all that comfortable, and especially since I am a bit chubby, my fat tends to get pinched in between the brace and my bra, which is really not comfortable. So a couple of years ago I had the brilliant idea that wearing a corset might help with that, and it did. It was a lot more comfortable, gave me the support I needed, and bonus, looked a little better too. And then I went and did something else that I've wanted to do for years. I had breast reduction surgery, and I am so glad I did. It made a huge difference in my pain levels. I have no regrets. Of course, that meant that my old corsets don't fit anymore. And so now that it's been 8 months since my surgery, my size is stabilized, and I'm all healed up, it's time to make new corsets. So let's get started. Okay, so I have my pattern pieces all laid out, and this is my lining fabric. I didn't record the process of creating the pattern simply because I did that a couple of years ago and I only needed to make some adjustments now. Here I'm tracing where the boning channels will be in the middle of some of the pieces. So you can see that there. And now I've got all my pieces cut out and arranged in order over here on my ironing board, and you can see a glimpse of the main fabric. And then I use denim for my strength layer because it's a lot cheaper than coutil. So now I've got everything cut out in all my layers. So I'm going to bring it back over to the table, and I'm going to flatline all my pieces. So this is one of the pieces in the back of the corset. And so there's our main fabric, it's the purple, and then I put the denim directly on top of that, and then the lining fabric on top of that, and then I'll get it all pinned together. Now with the magic of video editing, I've done that with all my different pieces, except for the center front. So that's what these skinny pieces are, and I'm going to put them together in a different order because I want to put the bust in between the layers. Next, what I'm going to do here is mark the stitching line on this fabric, and then I'm going to take this side of the bust and I'm going to mark where these pieces will stick out from the fabric because I need to stitch in between them but leave openings for them. And then I'll just get everything pinned together and take it over to the machine and get ready to stitch it. So I'm going to stitch these together. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance because when I'm actually putting it together, I'll be using a 3/4 inch seam allowance. That way none of these basting stitches will show. And here I'm stitching the pieces for the bust and then pressing them, turning them right side out. These are almost the only pieces that are done differently. Now before I actually put the bust into this, I'm going to trim the denim layer just so that there's a little less bulk at the seams. So now I'm going to take this piece of the bust and I'm going to slip it in between the main fabric and the lining fabric through the spaces that I left in the stitching. Then I will just get this all pinned together, and I pin it really close to the bust so that it keeps it from moving around. And then I'm going to very carefully and slowly stitch it in place using my zipper foot. This is obviously sped up because otherwise you'd be watching me do this for about 5 minutes. And here's how it looks when it's all stitched together. Now we'll move on to the other side of the bust, which is done differently. And here I'm going to trim out the denim layer again. So I'm going to line up the two sides here to mark where the buttons of the bust are going to come through the fabric. And I'm going to use an awl to poke the holes. And then I'll take this piece of the bust and fit it in between here and just carefully push the buttons through the holes. If the hole isn't quite big enough, sometimes I have to make it a little bigger. And what we're really doing here is just spreading the fibers apart instead of actually cutting anything. So it maintains the integrity of the fabric. Now, just like with the other piece, I'm going to very carefully pin this together as close as I can to the bust to keep it from moving around. And then we'll bring it over to the sewing machine. And again, I am stitching right next to the bust using a zipper foot. And now just look at how nicely that lines up. Next, I'm going to take my scissors and go ahead and do the same thing that I did before with that piece. I'm going to cut out the extra of the denim layer from the sides of each of these pieces. This is going to take a few minutes. And with the magic of video editing, that is done. Now, if you recall, some of the pieces had lines down the center of them. Those are for boning channels. So here I am stitching right along that line, and then I will stitch again a 1/4 inch from it. And then the boning will actually go in between the layers. I know this might not be the way it's traditionally done, it's just what works for me. So here's a close-up of how that looks. And then I did the same with the other pieces. And then I'm going to bring all the pieces over to my serger, and I'm going to give the edges just a nice clean finish. I forgot to mention that I have to use my pen to mark all the notches on the pieces before I serge them. And the reason for that is just that the serger cuts off that little tab that's sticking out from the edge. And now here are all the pieces with their edges neatly finished. And I realized I made a mistake with this piece because it's supposed to have a lining, which is what this gray piece is here. So I'm actually going to have to redo some of this piece. So I've got these pieces right sides together, and I'm going to stitch along that center back. And then we're just going to go over to the serger and redo the finished edge here, which I'm actually doing a little bit in from where it was. That way I won't have a serged edge on top of an area that was already serged, because that would be pretty bulky. Here, as I go to turn the lining to the inside, I realize that the lining was supposed to create that boning channel. So at this point, I decided to take a break and use a seam ripper to take out that stitching while I watch some TV. And it only makes sense to have a snack while I watch TV. And I had a recent leg injury, so I figured I would ice that while I'm sitting. Now that that's done, I press the seam, turn it to the inside, press it again, and then I need to press under the edge of the lining piece, and then we'll get it ready to stitch it down. So next, I stitch down that lining piece, and I do the same with the other one. Next, we create the boning channel for the center back boning, which is going to be a wider piece. I use 1/2 inch boning in that particular channel. And the reason for this is I just want it to have a little extra strength because it has to hold up to the strain of the lacing. So there will be the center back boning channel, then a space for the grommets, and then the smaller boning channel that was supposed to be created by the lining that I had mistakenly stitched before. So now we have all of our pieces organized and lined up, and we're ready to begin assembly. And yes, I do realize that when I laid this out, I put the bust pieces in between the wrong two pieces, and it's fine because I figured it out before I actually stitched them together. So here I'm just stitching the pieces together, and then you'll see what it looks like from the other side. I decided to fell all these seams down so that you get a nice clean edge, and this particular seam here is the only one where I'm going to clip curves because it's more curved than the other pieces. And then on this seam I will have to stitch it down by hand because there's a metal busk in there, and I'd break my needles if I tried to do it by a machine. So here you can see how I've clipped this curve, and then I folded the edge under on one side there, and now I've got it done on both sides. And here you can see how the seams look once they're stitched down. It's nice and smooth there, and I really like how it looks. And you can see how on some of the panels I get a little bit of wrinkling in between seams, but that's not much I can do about it. And here you can see how that curved seam turned out now that it's stitched down. I think it looks pretty darn good. And from the other side as well. So now you can see how I've got all the pieces stitched together. So now I'm going to bring this over to my serger and serge just the bottom edge so it's nice and clean and ready for binding and then boning. So now that's done, and you can see how nicely the edges match up. So now it's time for binding, and on this corset I'm using this silver ribbon because I couldn't find silver fabric that I liked to turn into bias tape. So this ribbon is 1.5 inches wide, so I'm going to press along one edge a 1/4 inch so that when I stitch it on and fold it over, I'll have a nice clean edge. And through the magic of video editing, once again, that part is done. It's stitched on, and I'm going to hand sew the inside of this binding. And here's a little glimpse of how that works. I take a tiny stitch through the binding and then one through the fabric. And here's how it looks when that is all stitched in place. See from the front and back. And this is why we generally use bias tape for binding, because since this isn't bias tape, it's a bit wrinkly. Moving on, we're ready to start putting in some of the boning. I like to use a combination of different kinds of boning. So this is 1/2 inch wide spiral steel, and it's what I use at the center back. I also have 1/4 inch wide spiral steel, which I use in specific boning channels. And then I also have this 1/4 inch wide polyester boning, which I will use for the rest of the boning channels. So I'm going to attach these end caps to this boning and pinch it in place with my pliers. And then I will insert that into the center back boning channel, and sometimes I'll use a seam ripper to kind of get any little edges out of the way. Not actually cutting fabric when I do that, I am just getting it unstuck. And sometimes this process takes a few minutes because you kind of have to finesse the boning into place. Next, I will get my polyester boning and cut that to length for the specific channels where it's going to go. And I cut it about a 1/2 inch shorter than it looks like it needs to be. and I use my scissors to round off the corners so it doesn't get caught in the boning channel. And now with my 1/4" spiral steel, I'm going to cut pieces for these 2 channels, as well as for the ones that will be under the arm. And again, I will cut them about a 1/2 inch shorter than it looks like they need to be, because of course we will be binding that top edge as well. So once I've cut it to length, I will add the end caps onto these as well, pinch them into place, and then I will insert this boning into the appropriate channels. So here's a close-up so you can see how I put this in. So you can see there's a lot of layers here, and if I put it in between the layers, then it won't get caught on any of the serger stitching that we did earlier. Okay, so I'm going to do as much of the boning now as I can. I'm going to do these areas and over here, but under the arms I'm going to do something different. So I did spiral steel in these channels, and then I'm going to do spiral steel under the arms as well, but I ran out of end caps, so I have to wait for those to arrive. In the meantime, I will do the grommets for the lacing. So I used my ruler to mark every inch between the 2 spiral steel bones on either side of the center back. Here's my grommet kit, and I think these silver grommets are going to look great against the purple. And the first step is to punch holes for the grommets, which tends to take a few minutes. And sometimes I have to use my scissors to kind of complete the hole. Next, we take the front part of the grommet, and it goes on this little tool, which then pokes through the hole, and we put the back part of the grommet on, and we use this other tool to hammer it into place. And then I will repeat that process many times all down this whole edge, and here's how it looks when they're all in place. And here's how it looks when both sides are done. At this point, there's not much more I can do on this corset until my supplies arrive, so I'm going to switch over to another one I've been working on. So here I am crocheting some lace for the edges, and this other corset has a light blue and navy color scheme, so you can see how it looks with the lace pinned in place. And I stitched that lace on by hand, along with the flossing, which I will show you a close-up here. And the whole point of flossing is to keep the bones from moving around and poking through the fabric when you're wearing it. And I really love how this corset turned out. And now it's been a few days and my boning caps have arrived, so now I can finish with the boning under the arms. And the whole reason I use the spiral steel under the arms is that in an old corset I had used the polyester boning, and it poked through in several places and was just really uncomfortable to wear. So since these come with caps, they don't have a tendency to poke through the fabric. And the process here is just the same as it was when I showed you earlier in the video. So we'll just speed this up a little bit. So once this is all done, the top is ready to be bound, and I'd like to serge it first, but my serger broke. So in the meantime, I designed some crochet lace for this corset, and here's just a little sample of how it will look. So the problem with my serger is that the needle broke, but it doesn't actually fit these standard needles. And the needles that do fit are not being manufactured anymore. This serger is quite old. I don't know how old exactly, but I inherited it from my grandmother when she passed away, and it is not a model that is made anymore. So there really isn't a way to fix this serger. I have to get a new one. In the meantime, I will just have to bind this corset without serging the edge first, which is fine. I just like the nice clean edge that you get with a serger. Of course, no one's going to see it, so it really doesn't matter. Here I'll show you how I finish the very edge here. I fold the binding fabric over, and oh geez, I'm out of frame. Sorry about that. But what I do is I pin it all in place along that edge, and then I will hand stitch it down. Here's a better shot of how I do that. Now the binding is all pinned in place and ready to be stitched, which I will do while I watch some TV. And then I've got the lace pinned in place as well. And now that's sewn down. And I'll give you a glimpse of how I do the flossing. These marks on my thumb are there for a reason. I use them to measure how long to make the stitches so that they are nice and uniform. And here's how it looks when the flossing is all done. I think it looks pretty good, and I can't wait to wear this. So now this is all done and ready to be laced up. I really like how the flossing turned out and how the lace looks. I decided to only put the lace on the top edge, not the bottom edge on this one. There's not really any particular reason for that. It was just a design choice. Okay, we are in the home stretch now, and I've got this lovely silver cord that I will be using for the lacing. So I trim off the end and I use my lighter to melt it so that it doesn't come unraveled. And I'm going to measure out the length of cord I need, which is going to be 8 yards. And that may sound like a lot, but it's pretty much exactly how much I need in order to lace it up properly and have enough to tie it. So next I need to find the center of the cord and mark it. And here I'm trying to use a chalk pencil and it's not showing up. So I decided to use a pen and just make a quick little mark with it that hopefully won't be too noticeable. And I start lacing from the top. And the reason I have it on my cutting mat here is so that I can actually lay it out with a uniform distance between the two sides. And I've chosen to use a crisscross lacing pattern, just like you would use on tennis shoes. There are endless options for different lacing patterns, but I like to stick with what's simple. Now once I get to the waist, I like to leave a big loop on either side, and then I'll continue the crisscross lacing pattern, and then I will tie the ends together at the bottom. Then I will just adjust the laces down here at the bottom so that it's nice and even, and then these parts can be tied into a bow. And now both corsets are done. So now I'll show you how to put them on. I wear my corsets on top of a snug tank top, and that layer is really just to protect the corset from my sweat and the oils in my skin. So once I get the busk all fastened, then I start tightening the laces. And what I'll do is actually reach way up behind me and pull down each set of laces. This takes a minute or two. And I realize now as I'm editing this that I did not get my lacing gap perfectly parallel, but that's kind of how it goes sometimes when you are lacing yourself up with no help. So here's a close-up of how it looks. Yes, I've got a little bit of fabric wrinkling, but not very much, and so I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. And here's the process with the purple corset. Sometimes I get a bit tangled up in these laces and it takes a little longer than it should, but I get it straightened out eventually. I didn't get this one laced up quite as tightly as the other one. I don't know why. Maybe I made it slightly smaller by accident. Oh well. But here's a close-up of how it looks. I really like the combination of the purple and silver. And you may be wondering, how easy is it to take it off? Well, it is just this easy. Just untie, loosen the laces just a bit, and then unhook the busk. And this is in real time, not sped up at all. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you more than you could imagine. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.